49ers, welcome to Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. Hope you're all doing well. This is where we bring you the latest 49ers news, analysis, and insights. Today, we're going to dive into the swirling rumors surrounding Trey Lance and some of the potential trade deals, if they make sense. We're going to separate fact from fiction. Will the 49ers actually even trade Trey Lance? I'll give you my opinions on whether I think that's going to happen or not towards the end of the show as well. So let's go ahead and let's get into it. You start to look at where the 49ers are, and if you're maybe a little unfamiliar with Trey Lance, I don't know if you would be, but he's a very talented young quarterback who was drafted by the 49ers third overall in the 2021 NFL draft. He's got a strong arm, tremendous mobility, a very high football IQ. Prior to the draft, and talking with one of the coaches that worked with him in that lead up, Sean McAvoy, he talked about how smart Trey Lance was and his ability to get up to the whiteboard, and how NFL teams were just marveled at the way that he was able to get up and break down a defense and get things set up. So Trey Lance is a very special prospect is what he was. The issue that I think when you look at Trey Lance and where he is right now is he only has thrown 420 passes since 2018. Interesting that we're doing this show today on 420, but on Trey Lance, throughout his career since 2018, he graduated from high school in 2017. From 2018 till today, he's only thrown 420 passes in games that count. And so when we start to look at Trey Lance and where he is as a quarterback in the NFL and why the 49ers would be possibly looking to trade somebody that has all the potential that Lance has, I think we have to look at that as one of the main reasons. He just hasn't been able to really develop. He hasn't had enough experience. The 49ers, I believe, and hearing some of what Kyle Shanahan said last year during the preseason portion of the season, he talked about how Trey Lance just needed to get out and play. They saw flashes of a guy who could get out there and play at a high level, that they felt like those flashes would become more regular with playing time. And they gave him the starting job in 2022. And unfortunately for the 49ers and Trey Lance, you lost it. It was completely wiped out just 5 quarters into the season. Lance on a run up the middle off of a counter option play, gets tackled, breaks his ankle. He's out for the season. And not only does he lose a full season of potential reps, it takes until early March, late February, for him even to be able to really start throwing again and be able to run around more injury-free. He hasn't totally been cleared to return yet, but all the reports are that we expect to see him on the field when the team opens up OTA practices in May. So we'll see how that direction goes for Trey Lance. But you look at it and you start to say, okay, now where could Trey Lance go? There was a rumor that came out yesterday, or speculation that came out yesterday. Actually, it was a report. I apologize. It was a report from Ian Rappaport who said that Trey Lance, the 49ers were receiving calls about the quarterback, about Trey Lance. And in that report, Rappaport was very clear. He wanted to make sure that everybody understood that those phone calls weren't coming from the 49ers. They were coming from outside of the organization. They were coming from other teams to the 49ers. Not sure if that's really overly significant. You look at where the 49ers are right now. They have already said that their quarterback moving forward would be Brock Purdy, or at least he'd be the leader in the clubhouse based on his performance last season as a rookie in the last 5 games of the regular season, and two postseason games, and also the finishing off the win over Miami, basically playing that entire game as well, although it wasn't a start. And you look at where Trey Lance is right now, and he's working his way back from an injury. And with everything going on, would the 49ers really want to go ahead and pull the trigger on a trade? So we'll get into that in a minute, but let's look at kind of, based on the Rappaport rumor report yesterday, there's been a lot of speculation and talk about where Trey Lance can go. And there's 3 spots that really make sense to me if he was to be traded. One of those would be the Houston Texans. He goes out to Houston. There's a lot of familiarity with Lance within that organization, from D'Amico Ryans and Slowick on down. There's familiarization with what Trey Lance brings to the table. Another location that's very similar to that would be the Tennessee Titans. Rand Carthon, former front office person of the 49ers, recently hired as the GM out in Tennessee. another spot that makes a lot of sense if they wanted to go ahead and make that trade for Trey Lance. They did draft a quarterback last year that's a kind of a developmental player. We'll see if they decide to go that route again with Lance here. That would be an interesting call. Another one, and one that makes a lot of sense to me, is the Indianapolis Colts. With the Colts, they have a new quarterback new head coach there, and Shane Steichen, who had been with the Philadelphia Eagles for the last few years as the offensive coordinator. And the reason that I think the Colts makes a ton of sense for Trey Lance is because of the success that Steichen had in Philadelphia with a quarterback who's very similar to Trey Lance in Jalen Hurts. Now, you start to kind of look through that, and those teams come about, and especially the top two, the Texans and the Colts. What would it take for the 49ers to trade Trey Lance? I don't think it's going to be a situation where if a team offers them a third or a fourth this season that they're going to just jump at it and say, yeah, we'll take him we'll do that. We'll give you Lance for a second, for a third, excuse me. I think for the 49ers, in order to make this deal, somebody's going to have to give them a second round pick. I just don't see it happening other than that. And so you start to look at the teams that have needs at quarterback. You look at teams that have needs all around, and the Texans make a ton of sense. The reason that the Texans, other than the folks that are there in their front office, the other part around this with Trey Lance with the Texans is there's a thought process that the Texans would, instead of going with a quarterback with one of their top two picks at number 2 or 12, that they would, because that team needs so much help, that they would go in a direction of somebody like an offensive lineman in the first pick and defensive lineman in the second pick, or vice versa. Anyway, they're going to fill holes in other spots. And then from there, they'll use their second round pick at 33 on Trey Lance. It makes a ton of sense. Like I said, they're not a good team right now, and it's going to take a little bit of time. And Ryan knows where Lance is. He's spent the last 2 seasons with him. Same with Bobby Slowick. And so you kind of start to look at that, and that makes a ton of sense. The other one that I mentioned, the Colts, they make even more sense. Like I said, the Colts aren't a very good team. The Colts and the Texans, that whole AFC South is really not good. The Titans are also in that same division. It just happens to be we're all in that same spot. And you start to look at it, and if it's okay for the Texans to trade those picks or use those picks and then trade the second rounder, I think it's the same thing with the Colts as well. And the Colts makes a lot more sense, I think, again, because of Shane Steichen there, the head coach, and what he's already been able to do. And I think a player like Trey Lance, with the system that I think I would expect Steichen to employ there, it makes perfect sense. I said this last season during the year that I felt like Jalen Hurts and what he was doing for the Eagles last year was everything the 49ers hoped that they were getting when they traded for Trey Lance. So, you go back and you look at what Jalen Hurts did, and, the Steichen and the head coaches that were, the other coaches that were there, they weren't there in Jalen Hurts' rookie season. They came in year 2 of Hurts' career, turned him around right away. They got to 9-8, made the playoffs with him in his first year as a starting quarterback, got to the Super Bowl in year 2 with him. So you start to look at the Colts, and that could be kind of a similar process. You get him in. If you can get Trey Lance there, you can maybe build that roster up and be competitive in year 1, because that division is weak to begin with. You can be in a good spot there. And then in year 2, you're right there to make a move up and get into the Super Bowl or get into the playoffs and really advance. So I think the Colts would make a lot of sense for Trey Lance, and that's from a positive. I'm saying that in the positive. I think if Trey Lance was to go anywhere, I think the location that I would like to see him go is to the Colts. I think that would fit him the best, and I think it's, in terms of early success and probably long-term success, the Colts would be number 1 there. Now, you start to look at it, and does this trade make sense? I think that's the other piece, and that a lot of people are getting into is, well, first off, let's talk about it making sense. And the reason right here we have KW2421. He says they're insane if they trade Lance. So, and I'm not far off with you here, KW2421. I just got done talking about the reasons that a Trey Lance trade would make sense. the locations where I think he would go, where I think he would fit in best. Now, let's talk about one other thing before I say that the 49ers are crazy to do it. Is one of the topics that's been discussed quite a bit is the salary cap ramifications of a trade. Now, if you follow my channel enough, you've heard me say a few times now throughout this process that one of my main reasons that I don't think the 49ers would make this trade is because of the salary cap. Right now, if the 49ers were to trade Lance during the draft, it would cost them $11.08 million against the cap. That's about almost $1.8 million more than what his cap hit is already going to be. His cap hit for this year is 9.3, so 11.08. That's a little bit up there, right? Now, if you wait until later on in the process, you actually get a little bit of a salary cap hit. Or salary cap hit, you're still going to get that, but you get a little bit of relief because instead of it being 9.3, it's going to be around 5.5. You basically take that 11.08, divide it by 2, and that's what the salary cap hit's going to be this year, but then you also have to have that hit next year as well. So if the 49ers have decided that this is what the direction that they want to go, if they get an offer, if somebody gives them a high 2, maybe a 1, are they going to be willing to go ahead and eat that salary cap hit? And here's the thing is, the reason I could see them making that decision, as I think about it at this point, is because the 49ers have already built out the bulk of their roster. They've already gone through the entire majority, I should say, of free agency. The draft is coming up in a week. So you can go ahead and you've already got your roster. So eating another $1.8 million in dead cap space isn't really all that much. It's really a small amount for the 49ers. And so you look at that and you say, okay, no, so we're going to have to eat a little bit more. It's going to put us right up against the number. How are we going to get around that? Well, you look at their cap situation, and they have Christian McCaffrey sitting right there because you can save about $7.5 to $8 million against the cap by doing a restructure of Christian McCaffrey's contract. This is one of those deals that I think when you look back at the beginning of the offseason, a restructure of McCaffrey's deal was one that everybody, I think, kind of expected because there's no signing bonus that's involved with this contract anymore. It's pretty much all salary. So it allows you a great deal of flexibility. You can go ahead and you make this trade of Lance. You go ahead and you restructure Christian McCaffrey. Now you have plenty of money to sign some more players, to get your draft class all signed. The draft class itself is going to be very cheap to sign, at least until training camp gets over with because of the top 51 rule. And then on top of that, you have Nick Bosa. Now, as far as Nick Bosa's contract goes, that deal's not going to get done until closer to the start of the season. And once that hits, that's going to be more savings because it's likely going to go down at that point. So makes a good amount of sense there from that standpoint, if that's the direction that they want to go. Now, back to this not making sense for the 49ers. The number one reason that it doesn't make sense for the 49ers has really nothing to do with the salary cap. It has really nothing to do with the draft capital that they spent or what they would get in return. The number one reason that a trade of Trey Lance wouldn't make sense is because right now Brock Purdy is injured. And we don't know if he's going to be ready to go for week 1, if he's going to be healthy, and those types of things. And so I think that would be the one thing. And has been my main reason why I would say that I would not move off of Trey Lance, is because I think the 49ers have struggled enough due to the injuries at the quarterback position to go ahead and trade Trey Lance now. If you're not 100% certain that you're going to have Brock Purdy week 1, is really stretching it. That's kind of how I felt all along. I've also been saying all offseason that I believe the 49ers are going to draft a quarterback. Now, that's the other thing. There's been a lot of talk around recently about the 49ers and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the quarterback out of UCLA, and some other guys here and there. I don't think that it necessarily has anything to do with Trey Lance or Brock Purdy or any of those guys. I think the only way it maybe has a little bit to do with Brock Purdy is because Purdy's not going to be there early on. And I think they want to have somebody that can throw the ball during rookie minicamp and somebody that they can develop for the long term. Because if Brock Purdy is the long-term plan, at some point, Trey Lance will not be in San Francisco. They're not going to keep him on the bench at 9.3, and then next year it's going to be a little bit more than that. They're going to keep him on the bench to be the backup. So at some point, I think he's going to get traded. I just don't know I just don't believe that it's going to happen during the draft. That's my take on it. My take is that the 49ers are going to keep Trey Lance. They're going to go through the draft. They're going to see how Brock Purdy's UCL, repair heals. And if they'll let Trey Lance and Sam Darnold battle it out, the rookie that's there, they'll let him battle it out. And based on how that's playing out, if Sam Darnold is able to show improvement over what he's done in the past, and that he can show that he's at the same level, maybe a little bit better than Trey Lance, and the rookie is looking good, then that's the point at which you possibly trade Trey Lance. A Trey Lance trade, I think, comes in the training camp at that point. Now, I also understand that that's kind of selling him low, right? The best way for the 49ers to get value for Lance is to trade him now, unless he just can go out there and just blow out training camp and Brock Purdy's completely healthy. But at that point, don't you want to see what you have in Trey Lance and see if you can carry that into a game? So it's a mixed bag with that whole thing. I had a couple of questions over here that I did note from Ken. I wanted to bring this one up. He says, Jack, doesn't the team know exactly what Lance is? I'm so tired of fans saying we don't know what we have in Lance. The organization knows exactly what Trey is. Ken, I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartely that the team definitely knows exactly what Trey is. That's one of the things that's been interesting to me about the discussions and throughout this whole process is I feel like we have a pretty good idea of what Trey is. Now, the only reason that we can say we don't know what Trey is because we haven't seen Trey Lance play with Christian McCaffrey. We just haven't seen that yet. And so I think for fans who are saying we don't know what we have in Trey Lance, I think the main reason is because we haven't seen him play with Christian McCaffrey in a game. We haven't seen him play with Christian McCaffrey at all. And then George Kittle, he's only made one start with Kittle. That was the game out in week 17 against the Houston Texans. So, that's, I think, where they're coming from. The folks that are saying we don't know is because we haven't seen him work in that same environment that Brock Purdy had. And it'll be interesting because here's the one thing that I will say. And I was at all of the training camp practices that took place last year in Santa Clara. I was not in Minnesota for those practices, but I was in Santa Clara for those. And I know there's fans there as well, but they're not there for the full training camp. There's days that are mixed in there where they're not able to come in and so on. And Trey Lance in training camp was very up and down. It wasn't a gradual growth, but it was very rocky. And I know that the weather out in Chicago in week 1 was about as bad as you can get for the first game of the season. And it was really a bummer because I was looking forward to seeing how he was going to perform in that game. That being said, he didn't play well. He made some throws. In that game. Yes, I understand it was wet. But in that game, Trey Lance played the way that we had seen Trey Lance play against Arizona, a little bit about how we saw him play against the Texans, especially at the beginning of that game. Just very, very up and down. And in training camp, it was very much the same. Up, down, inconsistencies. Trey Lance talked about it after the game. That's one of the things. One of the things about, I will say this for Trey Lance, and I mentioned this the other day. For people who get frustrated about Trey Lance or some of the negative, the way that he's talked about by myself, other people in the media. Here's the thing. It's not hard. It's very easy. When a player plays well, you talk about how, you talk about the good things he did. You talk about those things. You talk about, his performance was this, his performance was that, right? When he doesn't play well, are we supposed to come on here and say, well, he only completed 50% of his passes today, but I don't care about the 50 that he missed. Let's talk about the 3 really good throws or that one really good run that he had. I know they only scored 10 points. I know they only scored 17, whatever. But man, look at those throws. So I think when you hear what the 49ers are saying, it's not out of the question. And he just needs to come out and perform at a higher level. He needs to do, and I understand Brock Purdy had some help. He had Christian McCaffrey. He had George Kittle. Trey Lance is going to have those guys if he's here in training camp. So don't need to keep making the excuses for him, because if he is here and he is the guy that you say he's going to be, or if he's able to fulfill his potential that we all have talked about, all of the making excuses for him is unnecessary. Sports is the ultimate meritocracy. When you play good, you're the player. If you don't play good, somebody else takes your job. It's really simple. And that's why we're seeing Brock Purdy taking that job right now. Or as the 49ers have said, the possibility that he would. So Jay Mills he says, Jack, please mention that Montana, Young, and Garcia all played in conditions like that multiple times per season at Old Candlestick. Garcia got booed off the field versus Pittsburgh in 1999. So, yeah, I mean, if you go back and you look at the history of Candlestick Park back in the 80s and 90s, that field was under sea level. And so especially in December and January, that field would get really soggy and nasty. And you go back to the championship games of 92 and 94 that were played at Candlestick Park. Those were the Steve Young championship games. Awful conditions with just a wet, ugly field conditions. Yeah, there wasn't any rain. There was a little bit of rain at the beginning of the 92 game. 94, it had stopped raining before the game started, but that field was so bad. The field was green on TV, but that's because they painted it green. There wasn't a whole lot of grass out there. They're pretty much just playing on sloppy mud. But yeah, back in those days, that's how it was. And then in terms of Garcia, yeah, that was his first season in 99. Steve Young had got knocked out earlier in the year against Arizona. Garcia took over. He was really struggling, not playing well. Against Pittsburgh at home in 99 was a wet, rainy, ugly day. And he stunk. Got booed off the field. The 49ers benched him. Everybody was ready to kick Jeff Garcia to the curb. Never want to see him again. A couple weeks later, comes back, lights it up for the last couple weeks of the season. And I believe the next year he was in the Pro Bowl. It wasn't the next year, it was the year after that. He ended up making at least one, I know he made one Pro Bowl as a 49er for sure. I think he might have made 2. I'm not going to look it up, but it is what it is. And this is a guy that has been nominated for the Hall of Fame, made it past, made it into the discussion, at least in the early rounds. I'm talking about Jeff Garcia there. So this stuff happens, and these guys have played in ugly field conditions. That's part of what you dealt with when you played in San Francisco. Down in Santa Clara, it's not quite the same. Those field conditions are a little bit different. So that's an interesting question, though, Jay. I appreciate you bringing that one up. Corey says, we going to judge Trey strictly off camp? Jimmy threw 5 straight INTs in camp. We all know how that season turned out. Absolutely. It's absolutely not just training camp. Not just training camp. Not at all. You can go through. That's why I said you can. It's one thing if in camp you're going up and down, but then you get into the games. And unfortunately for Lance, the hard part for Lance is that he only played 5 quarters. There's a possibility that against Seattle, the way that game started out, there's a possibility that he would have blown it up, torn the roof off, right? That's what Kyle Shanahan has said, that he feels like if Trey Lance was able to stay healthy, he would have had a lot of success similar to what Brock Purdy has. And that's great. And I can understand the projection. And that's what it is. It's a projection. We don't know for sure because it didn't happen. I can understand the projection. Not if I agree with it 100% or not. It's an interesting projection, that's for sure. Ken comes in with a super chat. Thank you very much. He says, our fans won't admit it, but you were right with Mac. He just would have fit from day one way better than Trey ever could because he's more of a West Coast quarterback. Yeah, I think that's for me, and I said this before. It's consistency, accuracy, ability to make plays from the pocket, all the stuff you do with your feet and running around. That's all secondary. I think Jones in Kyle Shanahan's offense would have been really good. I think it would have been probably around what we saw with Brock Purdy, really. But instead of paying $9 million for Mac Jones, the 49ers are paying less than $1 million for Brock Purdy. And in some ways, I think Brock Purdy, from what I've gathered in watching him and talking to him and hearing his interviews, at the podium, he's a better guy. He's a guy that is somebody you want to be leading your team. And I think that's the difference. I think I'm okay with saying that I was wrong on Mac Jones from the personality standpoint. From the quarterback standpoint, I don't think so. But from a personality standpoint, Brock Purdy is better. And I just think it would have just been a natural fit for Mac Jones here with the 49ers. And I know people look at what's happened out in New England. You need to look beyond the wins and losses. He had a guy that was a special teams coordinator and a defense coordinator run the offense last year. It was awful. So anyway, let's see. Thank you very much for the super chat. Jack, I think Lance wasn't a dude that was going to start right away. So yeah, bumpy start doesn't mean he's done and we should give up on him. Yeah, no, you're right. I didn't think that it was going to be. I went into the last season thinking it was going to be a little bit of an up and down. And I think the 49ers understood that. And the thought process was, we're going to go through some bumps on the road here. And then by the second half of the season, he'll be better. He'll have his feet underneath him and he'll perform better. The injury, he just has not been, he wasn't able to stay on the field. And that's a brutal one. And the difference is the guy that took his spot, Brock Purdy, when he finally got in there, he had all the people around him, but he didn't leave any doubt with how well I thought he played. In terms of this one, I want to bring this one up too. It says, Jack, you're just a Trey hater, straight up, all pretty hype, going to end sooner or later, and he ain't all that. Fact. Yeah, we'll find out. I don't hate Trey Lance. When Trey Lance plays well, I talk about it. When Trey Lance has a bad day, talk about it. When during training camp, every report for those that watched me live from Santa Clara, there was the positives of the day, and if there was any negatives, it was negatives. Even when he had his worst practice of the training camp, actually a practice that Kyle Shanahan said had been his worst practice up to that point, I had some positives to say about his performance that day. The game in Chicago that we're talking about here, one of the things that I will point out is, you look at that game, and there's a lot of people that have made a lot of excuses for Trey Lance's performance that day. You know who didn't make any excuses for his performance? Trey Lance. Trey Lance got up to the podium. He manned up, stood up there, and before anybody could really get on him about anything and really grill him about what went wrong here or there, Trey Lance went through the list. Everything that I would have thought to write down about his day, he went out and said it himself. I didn't have to say it. He did. And after the game, a couple of days later, I wrote an article about how Trey Lance is a leader. He showed that he gets it that day. To get up, take responsibility for his actions, take responsibility for his mistakes, don't put it on other people. He very easily could have said, hey, it's not my fault. Debo's screwed up. But he's not that kind of a guy. And I felt like he did a really good job of that in that press conference, of the way he talked. So I talked about it. Somebody asked me on Twitter about it yesterday, and I put that down. He also said, something to do about how the 49ers didn't lose the game in Chicago just because of Trey Lance. And if you read the articles that I wrote for the Press Democrat after the Chicago game, I wasn't overly harsh on Trey Lance. He took that on himself. I talked about some of the good things he did. I talked about some of the bad things. I talked about his overall day. The next day, my day after write-up, my Monday morning, after kind of digesting the game a little more, I talked about why the 49ers lost the game. I didn't even know if I even said anything about Trey Lance in that regard. It was about the offense not being able to produce. It was about the defense struggling. It was about some coaching things that I didn't agree with. And the last thing I'll say about the Chicago game, we'll just drop it at this. Trey Lance had a lot, even without George Kittle, the 49ers had a lot more talent on the offensive side of the ball that day than the Chicago Bears. Chicago won the game by scoring 19 points to 10 for the 49ers. The better quarterback that day on the field was Justin Fields. I know you can tell me about the stats. I know the stats. I know, what they were. But one of the reasons that the 49ers had some of the personal foul penalties that they had was because Justin Fields threatened them. His athleticism, his ability to make plays with his legs, threatened the 49ers defenders. So they had to pay attention to him. And that's why they were hitting him late. That's why you saw the late hits on him that extended drives. So while his throwing numbers weren't over the top, he made plays. And some of that was because of the mistakes of the 49ers defense. But again, the pressure he was putting on the 49ers defense led to those. So just another part of that. So do I hate Trey Lance? Furthest thing from that. Ken Martin says, "Ray Jack, keep doing what you do. One of the best reporters out there. Appreciate it, Ken. That's very, very kind of you, and I appreciate your super chat once again." That's one of the things too. The channel, we had lost the monetization there for about a month. Was able to get everything cleaned up, got it back up and running just recently. So if you were a member of the channel before, it's there again. And the other thing that I did is I made it. It's only $1.99, $2.99, I think it is, to be a member of the channel. It used to be $4.99. We bumped that down a little bit. There's some cool things that you get out of doing that. So if you're so obliged to sign up and become a member, it's available once again. So I thank everybody that's stuck with me through that, and we've been doing a pretty good job of kind of rebuilding here in recent days. So let's see what else we've got. Just kind of looking around. I think it's well, pure clickbait material. I have a question. I got to ask you guys about clickbait. So my topic was Trey Lance trade rumors was the thumbnail. The topic said that this was going to be a discussion of those. I'm going to give you the positives, the negatives. We're going to kind of give you the whole skinny on it and give you my thoughts on it. That's what we've done here. I haven't told you anything. I've stuck exactly to what the description was. I've stuck exactly to what the thumbnail was. Clickbait would be if I told you we're going to come on here and we're going to talk about trading Trey Lance. And instead, we talked about Brandon Ayuk. This whole conversation has been about Trey Lance. The whole conversation has been about the potential trade of Trey Lance. So, nah, it's not clickbait. You might not like the topic. You might not like what I have to say. But is it clickbait? No. Now, in terms of where we're going, and KW2421 says, you didn't manufacture the story, somebody else did. I don't believe that there's been anything that's been manufactured about what Rappaport said. I think teams are calling the 49ers. I know from some articles that I read, there has been some discussion going on back to the scouting combine. There have been people talking about the 49ers taking calls. And think about it this way. The 49ers have invited those calls. The 49ers have invited all of the calls that they've received, if they have. And the reason they did is because they were asked point blank, are you willing to trade Trey Lance? Is Trey Lance on the block, basically? That's not exactly what was said, but that's the gist of it. And the 49ers said no. They didn't turn it down at all. They stuck with it. They said that, we'll trade anybody if the price is right, yada, 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 which appeases a good number of the 49er fans, because that's something the 49ers have said before, right? The 49ers, in terms of Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, have said, we'll trade anybody. We'll trade anybody. We'll trade anybody if we get the right offer. They didn't say that about Deebo Samuel last year. When they were asked about the 49ers' possibility of trading Deebo Samuel last year, the 49ers said, there's some people that you don't trade. There are some people that you don't move. Deebo Samuel is one of those guys. So there's a difference. They could have shut it down. All of the discussion about the possibility of trading Trey Lance, if the 49ers really are 100% sure that they don't want to trade Trey Lance, that they want to keep him and they want to keep him here for the long term, they can shut it down. They can shut it down by saying, there is no possibility. There are guys that you keep on your team no matter what. There are guys that you build your team around. And they can stop it if they want to. And now, will there be discussions still about the 49ers quarterback situation, because it's a hot topic that gets clicks? Absolutely. Right. And no, Joey, this isn't accurate. Patrick Mahomes isn't available. The Kansas City Chiefs wouldn't trade Patrick Mahomes because nobody's going to offer 25 first-round picks. I mean, you have to be somewhat. There's one thing to just, if we want to just throw stuff out. I mean, yeah, I guess somebody's going to give the Chiefs 25 first-round picks for Patrick Mahomes. The likelihood of that happening is slim to none. The likelihood of you winning the lottery is probably less than this ever occurring. I mean, and if that's what makes it so that it's possible, then anything's ever possible. There's a possibility, Joey, that you can give birth to a kid next week, if anything's possible. So, I appreciate it. I like it. I like the back and forth. I had a conversation. One of the things that I will say about this channel, and I don't know if it's different than others, but I will say this is, there's usually on the last few Thursdays, I've had roundtables with fans, guys who have their own channels or fans, whatever, coming on and talking. And one of the things that I said to all of them before getting on the show, before we went live, is I said, make sure that if there is something that I say that you disagree with, feel free to tell me that I'm full of shit. Because I don't want people that come on my show that just agree with me because they feel like they have to agree with me because they're on my show. I don't want that. If I bring you on my show and you disagree with what I have to say, tell me, because that makes for a more interesting conversation. It's one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot of folks that do this, and there's kind of seems to be a little bit of a click, and it's almost as if you bring somebody on your show and they're nice, you can't, it's, hey, I brought you on my channel. Why are you talking bad about me? And that's one of the things I've got to say this. It's one of the things that I really appreciate about Jesse Naylor, who I have on the Hammer and Nail show, that do that together with. We've been doing it for a couple of years. And follow me on Twitter. You know that Jesse and I used to go at it quite a bit. Really calmed that down a lot this past season. But what I like about it is when we are talking, even if we disagree, I'll come on here. If I've told him on Twitter that I think he's wrong, when we talk on here, I will tell him that I think he's wrong and we'll talk about it. And I think it's way more fun for me. I think it would be better, more fun for you if you saw people that do this, disagree, be able to talk about it, be able to tell each other you're full of malarkey, have a discussion about it, and then decide whether they who won the argument, for lack of a better term. So there you have it. Do I think that Trey Lance is going to get traded? I think it's 50-50. If I'm the 49ers, unless I get 33 or 35 in that range, that's the Colts and the Texans number, maybe even 41 from the Titans with something else, I am not trading Trey Lance. You're not going to get a first. I just don't see a team giving up a first unless you give up more assets. So I don't think the 49ers are going to trade Trey Lance. I wouldn't trade Trey Lance unless I'm getting like what I just said, 33 or 35. And from there, it's going to be a lot of fun. The draft starts a week from tonight. Right now, the first round is going to be about probably halfway to 3/4 of the way done. And then we get to see the 49ers make a pick on day 2 and then day 3. And who knows? Maybe Trey Lance gets traded. Maybe Brandon Ayuk gets traded. Maybe the 49ers are going to end up with a pick on day 1 of the draft. It's going to be a lot of fun. Before I head out, I'm going to just ask you guys, do me a favor. If you guys can hit the like button before you leave, that'd be fantastic. And then also, if you're watching this, you're already subscribed to the channel and you want to just hear somebody talk about the 49ers that comes in, gives you exactly what he thinks, and just tries to bring it to you straight, hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell notification so that you know when we're live, so you don't miss that, or you know that there's been new content that's been placed. Because that's one of the things I have been doing as well, is instead of doing live shows, I've been doing little videos and uploading them that way. It seems like sometimes those little 5 to 7 minute videos, people really enjoy those. So I've kind of been going back and forth between that. So really good question here. It says, Ken Martin, Jack, do you think Trey's agent could be leaking to the media because the organization said it's Purdy's team? That's definitely a theory that I've heard, and that's definitely one that would make a lot of sense. Trey Lance isn't in a position where if he wants to get traded, where he can really come out, and he can't do the whole Deebo Samuel thing. He can't come out and make demands. He can't do any of that kind of stuff. He doesn't have any background behind him to back him up. So if he wants to get traded, it's got to come from his team. Maybe his group has asked for a trade. Maybe they've kind of fed some information to Ian Rappaport. Maybe that's where it's all coming from. Maybe it's coming from Trey Lance's agent. So again, that's purely speculation on my part. I don't know for sure because I don't talk to Trey Lance's agent. I don't talk to Trey right now because we aren't able to show up in Santa Clara and talk to the players at this point. Next Monday, the 49ers have their pre-draft media press conference. So we'll get to talk to John Lynch Monday at noon. After that, they're going to make some players available to us. It'd be fantastic if Trey Lance is one of those guys that they allow us to talk to. That would be extremely fun to be able to have the opportunity to interview Trey. Maybe the first time I saw him, maybe just be like, hey, aloha, Trey. KW 2421. Seriously, Jack, you think after the Jimmy G experience, they will let Lance walk and hand the keys to Purdy? No chance. Not like Shanny and Lynch have amnesia. And again, that KW 2421, that is kind of the direction. That's why when I say the 49ers aren't going to trade Lance, this is why. I don't think that's going to happen. And in a lot of ways, I don't see a team being willing to offer 33 or 34. I don't think they're going to get that kind of an offer for Trey Lance. So I think they keep everything that as is in terms for insurance. They let Lance and Darnold do their thing. They get a guy in the draft. They see what happens with Purdy if he's able to come back, and you just let it work itself out. And if one of those guys gets cut at the end, they get cut or traded later. It doesn't happen now. So Lewis says, Lewis family says, Jack, you should tell Trey that people think you're his biggest hater. Hey, maybe I'll say that to him. Hey, Trey, I just want to let you know I'm your biggest hater, according to most of 49ers Twitter. Wanted to ask you first off, how was Hawaii? I know you were there on Monday. Oh, wait, you weren't. That's right. Your Instagram story, I read that wrong. But, it'll be fun. It'll be fun to get a chance to talk to Trey Lance. I'm looking forward to it. So there we go. That's it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you guys can do me a favor, like I said, hit that like button on your way out, and then hit the subscribe button as well, and the little bell notification so you know anytime we put new content up. Appreciate you guys taking the time to watch. All you guys and gals out there, 49ers, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. Warriors game's on. Some of you guys are probably over there getting ready to watch that as well. Have a good evening. Take care, everybody. And keep it locked in here at Inside the Farms with Jack Hammer for all your breaking news and content. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.